the leader of the free world behind the Iron Curtain. President Bush arrives tonight in Warsaw, Poland, to offer gentle encouragement and economic incentives as Eastern Europe takes historic steps toward freedom and democracy. This is the CBS Evening News. Connie Chung reporting. Good evening. President Bush is in Poland tonight behind a rusting Iron Curtain. His mission is both delicate and historic. Dan Rather is in Warsaw tonight to begin our week-long coverage of the president's trip.
Not far from the old Wilanów Palace here in Warsaw, President Bush is resting up after arriving tonight to begin what could be a breakthrough visit. 10 days that could help shape the new face of Europe, what could be the vanishing face of Soviet bloc communism in Eastern Europe, starting right here in Poland. Mr. Bush is now in a communist country on the brink of breaking away and on the verge of economic chaos, in an Eastern Europe marked by Marxist malaise. This is a highly symbolic trip for Mr. Bush, and a high-stakes one that requires delicate maneuvering and a deft touch. He has to stand and deliver a message of hope, moral support for sweeping democratic political reform, but not raise expectations too high, because the second big issue for Mr. Bush and Poland is Western financial aid to a country where everything is in short supply except red tape. Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa, now a political leader of the first official opposition to sit in a Polish communist parliament, was mindful of all that today when we talked with him at his home in Gdansk. What would he say is the number one thing he wants the United States, people in the United States, Americans, to understand about the solidarity movement and where Poland is today?
We will try and convince the Americans that our interests are the most important. Our problem is that we have to make a rapid correction to the economic system, because politically we have come very far already. It's like we're driving a car and it keeps sliding from one side to the other and you lose traction. You have to keep it from going off the road. This is where we need America, but we don't need loans. We need cooperation, like a joint venture. The West should pitch in, and the West just stands there like a shy girl and says, "I'd like to, but I'm scared." You should make up your mind.
The importance of Lech Wałęsa and solidarity in shaping Poland's new compromise government will also get Mr. Bush's official recognition. He travels to Gdansk himself Tuesday to visit the birthplace of solidarity and to visit at the home with Lech Wałęsa. CBS News White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews has more now on the president's trip.
In a clear act of aggressive statesmanship, President Bush arrived in Poland to full military honors and full of plans to help nudge Poland out from the shadow of the Iron Curtain. He is here to spread the message that the closer Poland edges toward democracy and free market economics, the greater the reward from the United States.
These are great days for Poland. Solidarity is legal, and Poland is making its own history, and America and the whole world is watching.
You're going to see a Poland that is following with determination the path of profound social, political, and economic reforms.
The president claims he is not trying to compete with Mikhail Gorbachev, but the gamesmanship implied by this visit is unmistakable. With both Poland and Hungary committed to free elections, including non-communist candidates, this four-day visit behind the Iron Curtain has the makings of a Cold War victory tour.
Well, I think the president and the leaders of Western Europe are celebrating, in a sense, the success of Western values.
Yet the president admits he must walk a fine line between encouraging change and tempting the kind of repression that most recently played out in China. His message then will be subtle, his rhetoric muted. Even the president's financial aid package for Poland comes with strings attached and with a warning that the West will demand more austerity and reform.
Poland has started along an ascending path of change, democratic change, and this climb is exhilarating, but not always easy.
Yet Mr. Bush does not need to be a financial Santa Claus in order for this visit to be a success. To the White House, it's enough that the president is here, tempting the East with the rewards of the West and making Gorbachev nervous in the process. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Warsaw.
We've moved inside the palace now, Connie, in this country of friendly and hardworking people.
Dan, have you been able to get a sense of what the people of Poland expect from President Bush?
One, they expect him to say and do whatever he can to propel the momentum of the movement for freedom and democracy. Number two, they'd like to have some indication that the West in general and the United States in particular will do at least a little more in the way of giving investment credits and capital to help what is a chaotic Poland economy at the moment.
The Solidarity chief economist, though, is asking for $10 billion, and that certainly isn't likely.
I don't think they expect anywhere near that much, and also we should note that they're talking about investment. They're talking about loans. They're not talking about aid money that would come directly into the country. But I don't get a sense that they really expect that. It's your usual, well, we'd like to have that much. Whatever you can help us with, we very much appreciate. But this is important, that the Polish people understand that they must do it themselves, that if their economy is going to be pulled out of the muck it's been placed in by the Soviets over the last almost half century, that they're the ones, the Poles are the ones who are going to have to do it.
If President Bush goes there with the same hackneyed phrases, he will be actually losing a missed opportunity. Would you agree?
Yes, but I don't think there's very much chance that's going to happen. That President Bush has been here before. He is, by the way, very popular with Poles. He came here when he was vice president under President Reagan. The Poles feel that they know him. They feel that he knows them. And while it's always possible with any president that he will disappoint, I think that's very unlikely on this trip with President Bush.
Dan, do you feel that President Bush can strike a balance without stepping on Gorbachev's toes?
Well, that's exactly what he intends to do. He understands that Gorbachev has scored and scored well in Western Europe, and he'd like to score and score well here in Eastern Europe, but perhaps not too well, because he understands that Gorbachev has sent him a signal saying, listen, we want you, President Bush, to succeed in Eastern Europe, but only up to a point. So it's a delicate balance, but one for which President Bush is well prepared.
Dan Rather in Warsaw. We'll be back with more news in a moment. That spilled thousands of gallons of heavy oil into the Delaware River 2 weeks ago sailed toward home today. The ship, which flies the Uruguayan flag, left Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania, where it has undergone some repairs. It's bound for Curacao for still more repairs. The tanker that caused the nation's worst oil spill denied harbor in Oregon headed today for the shipyard where it was built. The Exxon Valdez is due in San Diego Tuesday. It's welcomed by San Diego's shipbuilding industry, where jobs are scarce, and a concern for environmentalists worried about more spillage. Israeli soldiers today blew up the home of the Palestinian accused of last week's terrorist attack that killed 14 people. The 23-year-old suspect, whose home was in the occupied Gaza Strip, is held in an Israeli hospital. 2 Palestinians were killed today in clashes with Israeli troops. For the second straight Sunday, a black Catholic priest defied church authorities and held worship services in Washington, D.C. The Reverend George Stallings, who has been suspended by the church, conducted services that again blended African religious rites with traditional Catholic liturgy. He accuses the Catholic Church of racism. It was a West German triumph today at the Wimbledon tennis tournament. Steffi Graf retained the women's championship by defeating Martina Navratilova for the second straight year. And Graf's fellow West German, Boris Becker, regained the men's title, beating Stefan Edberg. Becker lost to Edberg last year. Bush's visit to Eastern Europe this week comes at a time of great change and great challenge. Tonight on Inside Sunday, a closer look at some of the challenges. One of them comes from President Bush. In exchange for U.S. economic help, Bill Plant tells us the president is challenging countries like Poland and Hungary to reform their economies.
If the Bush administration has its way, this is the free market wave of the future in Eastern Europe. A bicycle factory outside Budapest in which an American company owns a controlling interest with the blessing of the Hungarian government.
It's a profit-making venture in Budapest, and we will sell bicycles not only to the Hungarians, but also to customers in Western Europe.
Or consider this, the Lenin shipyard at Gdansk, birthplace of solidarity, which a Polish-American woman is negotiating to purchase in a joint venture with Warsaw. Deals such as these are a far cry from the first heady days of détente back in the 70s, when Western nations and lenders made billions of dollars worth of loans to pump up the socialist economies. That money was squandered by a system that couldn't adapt. And the U.S. says that this time, reform has to come before new money.
To simply grant relief or make highly concessionary loans without reform in the final analysis will not get them where they want to go.
But the reforms the U.S. believes are necessary promise to be very difficult.
There has to be a major restructuring of industry, closing down a lot of antiquated industry, making the industry much tougher, much more efficient.
That means unemployment and higher prices, hard times. It's a bitter pill for people who have been told for 40 years that socialism would take care of everything.
In each of the countries of Eastern Europe, for there to be decisive change, they're going to have to go through revolutions, economic, social, political.
Meanwhile, the West is moving. France has promised $100 million. Others will be urged to help when the problem is discussed next week in Paris at the Economic Summit. But there is no guarantee that anything will work.
There's really no book written on how to move from a communist, socialist, Stalinist type of economy to a market-oriented economy. It's just never been done.
And that makes these risky times in Eastern Europe, since no one is certain where the limits of change are, not even the Soviets. On the other hand, no one wants to push Moscow hard enough to find out. Connie?
Thank you, Bill. Inside Sunday continues now with a look at the president's trip through the eyes of former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. We spoke with him earlier this evening. Mr. Brzezinski, how high are the stakes for President Bush on this trip?
I think they're very high. In fact, I think this is the most important presidential trip to that part of the world since a trip undertaken some 45 years ago by another American president, a trip to Crimea, which produced the Yalta Agreement. That settled the fate of Eastern Europe for 45 years. President Bush's trip might reopen the question of the future of Eastern Europe and give it a chance to be part of Europe again.
How does President Bush appear strong enough to boost democracy without being overbearing and imposing upon his communist hosts and Gorbachev?
I think it is very important that all concerned understand that the process of political and economic change in Eastern Europe will have to be gradual, by evolution, not by revolution. And I'm sure that the president will try to tell the Poles and the Hungarians that the West cannot bail them out. The West can only help them. But it is up to the Hungarians, up to the Poles, to make the necessary reforms, to alter the systems, and to make it possible for them to be truly part of Europe.
In many ways, Mr. Brzezinski, this is a chess game with Gorbachev, is it not?
In some ways it is. He travels to Germany, he travels to France, he tries to score points. The president is doing the same in Poland and Hungary. But the broad effect, I think, is that we are now seeing a process of the dismantling of communism. Eastern Europe, led by Hungary and by Poland, is entering the post-communist phase. And that is historically really unprecedented and truly important.
Mr. Brzezinski, when President Eisenhower encouraged the Hungarian revolt, I think he watched helplessly in 1956 as the Soviets moved in. This is an entirely different situation, but there can be a lesson learned from that, can there not?
Yes, I think we have to be very conscious of the fact that the situation in Eastern Europe is very fragile. The economic situation is particularly difficult, and social and economic tensions could produce outbreaks, and one cannot even exclude the possibility of some Chinese-type solution being attempted. This makes it all the more important that we be very prudent in what we advocate, and that we also provide the East Europeans with some of the needed economic assistance so that their transition to post-communism is smooth and not violent.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brzezinski, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Nice to be with you.
Former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. And finally, before we say goodnight, what was that in the sky west of Tokyo? A Japanese man spotted a UFO high above his house the other night and shot this video. The object reportedly was rotating and had red and blue lights. But officials say there were no planes or weather balloons in the area at the time. So what was it way up there? Heaven only knows. And that's our news. Bill Plant will be here later with the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Connie Chung in New York. I'll see you again tomorrow night, joining Dan Rather as he continues anchoring our coverage of the President's European trip and our special look at the new face of Europe. Thank you for joining us and for all of us at CBS News. Good night.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, Harry Smith will be in Warsaw covering President Bush's trip to Poland. Lech Wałęsa will be joining us along with Secretary of State James Baker on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.